Today's program is being recorded. Make sure you understand that this is for general educational purposes only, and we do not focus on the views or positions of the sponsoring or presenters' organizations. So greetings and welcome to today's educational program, Managing for Quality Lecture Series number 13, Quality as an Environmental Mandate by Dr. Gregory Watson. This is your moderator, Doug Wood, with ASQ's Quality Management Division. So today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Dr. Gregory H. Watson. Please join me in welcoming him. Greg is an honorary member of ASQ, past president, and has been doing these talks for us for all of last year, and we're going to continue another series going into 2021. So with that, I would turn this over to Dr. Watson. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Doug. So today I want to give you a perspective in looking at quality in a different way than perhaps what we've looked at it before. And so we'll look at this as quality as an environmental mandate. And we've been talking about managing for quality, and the question is, how will managing for quality change as we look into the future? And so the idea in this series of lectures, the 6 that are coming forward, is to think about developing a concept of macro quality for humanity. This is something that the International Academy for Quality has been working on for some time in different dimensions. So in this session, we'll talk about quality as an environmental mandate. And in the future sessions, we'll talk about the economics, social responsibility, human rights, political policy, and then how does this actually then work in terms of the manifest destiny for humanity. And we're going to be extending the lessons that we have learned about micro quality, which is quality from the firm, so how do we work effectively at a global level for the benefit of humanity? So first, what do we mean by a mandate? So a mandate is a command or authorization to act in a particular way on a public issue. So it's basically saying that we are giving you a power that we're transferring from one group to another to allocate decision rights about a particular subject or area of authority. So it's a specified strategy to be executed or a path of action to be followed that grants performance of actions or duties that result in a particular desirable outcome. So we'll talk about this as an environmental mandate. So a mandate actually bestows trust and responsibility on the recipient of that power or authority. So we'll come back and we'll talk about the specific mandates that we're facing in the future. What do we mean by quality? We're going to use a definition that we've been talking about throughout this series on managing for quality, where we talk about a transcendental definition. This is a high-level definition. And this is quality is the relentless pursuit of goodness coupled tightly with the persistent avoidance of badness. Now, I'm not going to go into this definition where it came from. We've already done that. So we're going to accept this as our way of thinking. But there are some core principles behind this, that we should respect people in their diversity of race, religion, nationality, and so forth. We should respect scientific gains of those who've walked before us. We should be building, if you will, on the work of others. As Galileo said, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I wouldn't have gone so far by myself. And we should protect the environment which sustains all of us and abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm. So we're practicing 2 things in all activity. Either we're helping or we're doing no harm. So goodness that is careful not to create unintended consequences as it improves our lives. That's really what we mean when we're talking about quality. Now we turn to the third word in this title, and this is environmental. So what do we mean by environmental? And we're going to talk about the aggregate of surrounding things, conditions, or influences. So goodness is achieved by respecting and protecting the world around us, avoiding badness, acting proactively to reverse the ill effects of past actions. So we see global environmental risks are increasingly caused by our human activities, which are becoming more complex and interconnected, which has a far-reaching consequence for people, economies, and ecosystems. And humanity has actually entered into what's called the Anthropocene age. This is a geological epoch where humans are the dominant force of change on the Earth. And this age is characterized by increasingly interconnected and accelerating world. And we see this interconnectivity in terms of the technology that unites us and the acceleration in terms of this pandemic that's affecting all of the world, that's grown and it's spreading everywhere. So the environment includes both the world of today and also the world of tomorrow, or what we're going to be doing with it in the future. Now, from this, we have to learn how to manage the risks. And we think about risks, we think about the hazards we have, the exposures, and that creates vulnerability. And we're talking about Anthropocene risk, or human-scaled risk, so we start seeing there is some cross-scale integration. We're changing the basis of risk predictions. And we're also changing the baseline of the hazards. And this global ecological connectivity is also changing the focus of those risks. So managing risk will become a dominant emphasis in quality to continually improve the environment. Quantum physicist Richard Feynman said, if we want to solve a problem that we've never solved before, we must leave the door to the unknown ajar. Leave a little opening so we can have something strange, something new enter into our processes. So the first part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is discovering this distinction between macro versus micro quality. And Karu Ishikawa talked about pursuing quality to the benefit of humanity, and that's the perspective that we're going to take. He said in management, the first concern of the company is the happiness of the people who are connected with it. If the people do not feel happy and cannot be made happy, then that company does not deserve to exist. So he's thinking about why we have organizations. It's to create a system of joy in how we do our work. It's create appreciation and attraction for the work that we're getting from that company if we're its customers. And so we want to think a little bit differently about quality. We want to distinguish between macro quality and the domain of micro quality. Now, in microeconomics, it's sometimes called the theory of the firm. And what we're talking about is the way that an organization operates. Economists tend to reduce this to what they call price theory, supply and demand. Traditionally, the key emphasis of quality has been on creating stability in production operations, eliminating waste, reducing defects, all of which concentrates on cost reduction component of that pricing theory. That's very consistent quality work with the microeconomic work. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, refers to large-scale systems, the economic operations of an industry or a specific society or nation, or the global interrelations between them as in trade conditions. So macro quality elevates the concentration of quality to socio-technical systems that influence quality of life for humanity and of those factors that affect this condition. The shift from micro quality will greatly increase then the breadth and the depth of our quality activities. So what is the relationship of macro quality to the traditional quality activities? Well, when we think about traditional quality activities, we think about things like quality assurance, control, and improvement. And this is the foundation upon which we're going to engage environmental improvements by quality methods. So Dr. Duran talked about how he perceived quality as a trilogy, and it's parallel to financial acts of financial control, financial improvement, financial planning. However, if we add the audit function to Duran's trilogy, quality assurance, or as the accountants say, a second pair of eyes, in the Japanese, they call this jisuiken, which is also the way teams operate to provide a second set of eyes. And they use this for transaction, but it's also the activity of quality inspection, a second set of eyes looking at what we're doing. Then we can use this analogy between finance and quality, and we can use it completely. So the job of quality inspection, assurance, and auditing is to check, like in the Plan, Do, Check, Act, in a way that assures that mistakes and problems do not influence outcomes. The job of quality control is to maintain a stable system of processes in which the outcome is produced constantly with minimal variation. For example, no shortfalls or overachievements that are not planned. The job of quality improvement and planning is to maximize the use of all resources, including the human ones, while minimizing financial losses. So how does this new transcendental definition of quality apply to delivering macro quality? Well, when we promote quality as a macro application, we see that quality must be advanced from the level of a firm for the benefit of all society. The shift to macro quality also shifts the concern that one is purely financial to one that engages humanity and it seeks to improve quality of life for all, health, happiness, prosperity of all people, while at the same time assuring the long-term stability or sustainability of our planet. In the Bible, Cain famously asked God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" To which in the New Testament the reply was, "Bear ye one another's burdens." The same principle is echoed in all of the world's religions. And what's interesting is that this job of bearing another's burdens, it's sometimes called stewardship. And stewardship is a job of supervising or taking care of resources that do not belong to you as a person. So it's the obligation of a steward to carefully and responsibly manage resources that have been entrusted to them by the owner of those resources. The owner's mandate is the moral proposition: do no harm, prevent any loss, and increase the value of benefits that may be obtained. So how can macro quality be applied to address the negative components in a social system? Well, what we want to do is think about applying lean and clean methods to the earth. Badness is to avoid waste and loss to future generations that is caused by humanity's lack of quality stewardship for the earth's resources. Now, the Japanese gods, they hate filth. So the Shinto gods actually say, that filth is like a sin. In Buddhism, we see that teaches the importance of cleanliness for having a peaceful mind. And in Japan, we see 85% of the people relate to Shinto, the national religion, and about 65% to Buddhism. And so there is a very strong culture built into their very way of thinking and being that is about clean. And if we talk about lean improvement, we see that cleanliness is foundational in daily works discipline. It's the first S in the system called Seisou. And cleaning as a daily discipline of sweeping, collecting, disposing trash, wiping, and cleaning surfaces. It's about a 10-minute job that happens in a Japanese factory at the end of the day. And in Japan, however, there are other words that also describe routine cleaning. So katsuke is meaning to make things tidy. It's just common sense organizing and cleaning. Suji is the Buddhist daily tradition, cleaning the temple by washing the floor with a wet cloth in a disciplined manner called a kata. And so we see the kata is a method or form for how you do this, and it's highly specified. You take a cloth, it's wet, you fold it a certain way, you push it on the floor, you check, it gets dirt, you refold it a different way, you push it again, it gets more dirt, you refold it another way, and so forth. So Seisou also, though, initiates what we call total productive maintenance. And this type of Seisou is different from the Seisou that's in 3S, because this type of Seisou is maintenance cleaning, and it's locating abnormalities in work process that are uncovered only by deep cleaning and inspection. And this is part of the autonomous maintenance process in TPM. That's called Jisu Hosen. We also see that in these Japanese systems, there's something called Osuji. So this is the annual deep cleaning that initiates a fresh spirit and fresh start from the year. And in this, you're practicing susahari, which is dusting of the surface dirt, where you remove the dust, and at the same time, you're giving thanks for the blessings you had of the past year, which created the dust, and you're also purifying that work for the year ahead. So in Finland, every spring, this happens. Women take their rugs out of their houses. They beat them by the ocean side to get the winter's dirt out and clean them so that they're ready for the summer. And what this does is this elevates the nature of cleaning from one at a perfunctory level, where I'm just getting rid of my dirt and throwing away the trash, to a cultural level, where what we're actually doing is we're celebrating the way we're living our life. And so that gives us a whole different perspective on what it means to have cleanliness as a part of our way of working. Now, in the second part of the session, what I'd like to do is talk about the dissection of the environment into categories of goodness and badness. And I'm going to present a number of these, and time in 1 hour doesn't really permit us to go into great depth on all of these. But you'll see when we take a look at the slides that there is a lot of depth in terms of density of text. So those of you who want copies of this can certainly get it and study it in your leisure. So here we're going to talk about pursuing goodness and avoiding badness, or the necessity of environmental stewardship. Now, Cyril Darlington, in The Evolution of Man and Society, said every new source from which man has increased his power on earth has been used to diminish the prospects of his successors. All his progress has been made at the expense of damage to his environment, which he cannot repair and he could not foresee. So in other words, what he's saying is that we make progress, but we're doing it at the expense of the future generations. And if we take a look at this, the first thing we see is the first idea is we need to stabilize the climate and reclaim pollution. Robert Kennedy Jr. said, "I always saw pollution as theft, and I always thought, why would somebody be able to pollute the air, which belongs to all of us, or destroy a river or waterway, which is supposed to belong to the whole community?" And if we take a look at the history that we see of carbon dioxide and water, ocean temperatures, we see that there's very big effects in terms of what's happening. If we take a look at this carbon dioxide, we see that the knee and the curve are the very first knee, and then the expansion up to 20,000. But since then, it's actually accelerating even faster. We take a look at global oceans. It doesn't move the temperature as much as it does, but it's been a consistent increase in global temperatures of the oceans. And the mandate of this is we have to stabilize the climate through activity that concentrates on air, ocean pollutions, reverse the trend of anthropocentric global warming. There is no choice to do this. It's been established in terms of scientific analysis, and we have to move forward with positive actions to deal with this. So it's no longer a political issue. It's become actually a moral imperative that we have to fix this because we're destroying the world for future generations. A second topic is providing clean water and distributing it equitably. Martin Luther King III said, because no matter who we are or where we come from, we're all entitled to the basic rights of clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and healthy land to call home. Now, there are lots of water problems. And what we see is this is a chart here from NOAA, the National Center of Oceanography and Atmospheric Analysis. And we see that this is the percent of the wet or dry areas. And we see that the top area is the droughts. And we see that in 2012, we see droughts covering over 60% of the United States. And we start seeing there's a resurgence of the wet areas in 2019 and so forth as we go forward. But we see problems exist, droughts and then floods, the opposite, microplastic pollution, the North Pacific garbage patch, which is the largest piece of garbage in the world is sitting in the ocean. We have lack of drinkable water or access to clean water. There's industrial waste in water, carcinogenic chemicals in water. And the mandate here is we need to recover our polluted waterways, eliminate drought, and enable equitable distribution of clean water to all communities. Just remember the story of what happened in Flint, Michigan, with its water crisis based on the lead poisoning that was in its system. Another one is we have to deliver ubiquitous energy, affordable power. So Piyush Goyal said, electricity can transform people's lives, not just economically, but also socially. So ubiquitous energy means there's access to energy anywhere, at any time. Efficient energy that is affordable and available, and it's also distributed to everyone. And this means we have to capture energy from a wide variety of alternative sources and enable access of that to be put into the electrical grid systems that we already have. So this is advanced solar and wind technologies, hydrogen electrolysis, geothermal, ocean wave, hydroelectric, biomass, nuclear. And so the mandate we see here is that we need to give reliable, affordable energy delivered to all communities across the world so they all have an opportunity to improve in all dimensions. One of the most important enablers, if you will, in developed society is the delivery of reliable power to those communities so they can do things more effectively than humans can by themselves. The next is improve healthcare and promote wellness. The World Organization says health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And as we take a look at the current situation we have with the pandemic, many people have not been affected, many people have. But all of us have been having some effect in the disruption of our lives. That is this not just this is a social well-being component of healthcare. And so we see that health issues arise from climate change. Providing healthcare to nations in crisis is another thing we have to do. Making healthcare accessible to everyone, expanding access to vaccines and medicine so people can protect themselves against pandemics and other health situations like polio. Fighting communicable diseases, preparing for epidemics, making healthy food more accessible, and preventing antibiotic resistance so that our bodies can actually use antibiotics to effectively fight infections that we have, and ensuring healthcare facilities are clean and sterile. So the mandate here is our population is growing and aging. We have to have the ability to access quality healthcare and receive drugs and appropriate medical treatments. We need to accelerate those things because we're aging much faster than humanity has ever before, both in terms of longevity of life and in terms of the mass of people who are entering into those age groups. Another area is produce safe food and secure the availability of food. Franz Kafka said, so as long as you have food in your mouth, you have solved all questions for the time being. And I was debating whether we should use this quote in this presentation or use one from Karl Marx, where he said, keep the people hungry and they will not want to revolt. And so when we look at the United Nations and their Sustainable Development Goals, this is number 2, end hunger, achieve food security, and develop sustainable agriculture. So we have to look at land erosion and topsoil erosion, restore degraded farmlands that has been farmed out, if you will, or the nutrients have been taken from it, boost the yield of the current agricultural land, broaden the use of organic fertilizers, improve irrigation storage facilities, develop drought-resistant crops, apply pest management technologies, increase availability of genetic feedstocks, and educate the small and medium farmers in modern agricultural practices. 70% of the people involved in farming are SMEs, but they produce a minority of the food in the world. And so we have to understand, how will they be treated in the future as we start seeing major agribusinesses moving forward and then squeezing those people out? So the mandate here is secure availability of nutritious, safe food for all communities, with particular emphasis on children in underdeveloped countries. When I was working in Africa for 3 years, and you see the children, you see the effects of the malnutrition. In the Gambia, the people have families and they're living at the poverty level, which is $1.25 a day per person, which is not enough to feed, clothe, and house a family. Another thing we see that is necessary is we have to drive accessible technology and create global literacy. So Bruce Coville said, withholding information is the essence of tyranny. Control of the information flow is a tool of a dictatorship. So we need to enable broad-scale diffusion of information infrastructure, and that enables the development of global literacy, which creates capacity for having a democratic society where people can function in a shared community. And what this requires is quality education at all levels of teaching, access to the internet for everyone involved in a learning environment, availability of computers to use, broadband connectivity so that the signals can get to everybody, creating personalized learning environments so we can learn what we need for our lives, opening the flow of information and employment-related education. And the mandate here is internet broadband access to all with improved quality of public education to equip people for the coming job markets, not for jobs that don't exist or existed at our grandfather's age, but for the jobs that are coming about now and how the future will be. So it has to be a forward-looking program. We also need to think about the financial components of creating mutual prosperity and eliminating poverty. So Mehmet Murat Ildan said, poverty has created a new planet within this planet, a planet of misery that all humanity should be ashamed of. I remember visiting in Chile and seeing just outside of Santiago, the beautiful mansions inside of Santiago, and then there was this hill where the ultra poor were living with corrugated steel, if they were lucky, over their heads. Some of them had cardboard for their walls, dirt on the floor. and such a big disparity. Now, the very beginning of this industrial revolution, Frederick Taylor, who wrote the Principles of Scientific Management, in that book, he proclaimed that the purpose of scientific management was to be the development of mutual prosperity for workers and companies. And that promise never came about. So we need to think, how do we end this extreme poverty everywhere, where we see less than 10% of the world lives on less than $1.25 a day, and most of those people live in the sub-Saharan African nations. We have to create jobs that pay a decent wage, provide social protection for children in poverty conditions. In 2016, 4 billion people had no form of social protection. We have to accelerate support for developing policies and programs of economic development for the least developed and developing nations. And we have to encourage the development of entrepreneurship among youth in these least developed and developing nations, so they grow up with a hope for their future and will think about contributing in innovation to the world ahead and what it needs. And we have to encourage access to global trade markets through quality programs. So the mandate of elimination of poverty and increasing the ability of all humans to have fulfilling work. And then we also have to consume responsibility. So without inequality. Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, actually he's 2 times governor, said multinational corporations do control. They control the politicians, they control the media, they control the patterns of consumption, entertainment, thinking. They're destroying the planet and laying down the foundation for violent outbursts and racial division. And when we think about what we need for the future, we have to ensure sustainable production and consumption patterns. So we need to restrict consumption of natural resources, reduce food waste, reduce pollution and waste in all dimensions. We have to have environmental management of chemical life cycles and reduce subsidies on non-sustainable fossil fuels. We have to eliminate overproduction of durable goods, remove market distortions that encourage consumption, and develop sustainable tourism as an industry and promote sustainable procurement practices. The mandate here is to increase economic development and ability of SMEs in developing nations to access global markets for trade, because they're the ones who are not getting anything out of this. When we were taking a look at the cashew market in terms of Africa, we see that they're growing cashews and they're selling them for less than €1 a pound, or $1 a pound, if you will. And that's for top grade cashews. If they're second tier, it's 50 cents. If they're third tier, they're getting 10 cents. And so as you start taking a look at it, all of those criteria mean that most of the money that's being made is not made by the grower. It's made from there on until it gets to your market, where those top tier cashews are costing maybe 10 times as much. And we also have to worry about peaceful coexistence and social justice. So Martin Luther King said that true peace is not the absence of the tension, it's the presence of justice. And here we see the need for conflict negotiation or resolution. So how do we mediate and arbitrate disputes or promote peaceful coexistence and establish national reconciliation so that we can get together with those who have been fighting each other in the past? How do we improve the quality of governance or build social cohesion, expanding the empowerment of women, strengthening non-state actors and engaging these non-governmental organizations? And we need to develop a condition of normalcy. So the mandate here is to reduce global conflicts and improve the rights of people in all nations so they're treated with respect. And what these all sum up into is what the United Nations has published as its Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I haven't had time to hit on all of these and how they're interrelated, but basically these UN SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, define transcendental quality for all of humanity. And they're basically saying we want all goodness and no badness for all on planet Earth. Now I come to the third part of our discussion. And this is about quality activism in pursuing environmental security. So if we need to pursue this quality environmental mandate, what does that mean in terms of what we can actually do about it and what we have to contribute? So Clara North, at the end of the day, talked about we should pursue what's relevant for humanity. She talked about her experience in the Amazon. She said, you may walk for days without seeing a tree. In Beijing, the air is the color of a bruise. It's a grayish brown. 3,000 miles of litter floats in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's even more in the Pacific. Plastic bags and old diapers bumping against the side of ships. I sat before a committee in Brussels, the European Commission, and they said, what do you want us to do about it? If we change now, we'll destroy our own economies. And I said, you've destroyed your own world. Where do we establish our priorities? What is it that's important for us? Is it about getting the economic conditions so they keep advancing and we have more and more and can create more conspicuous consumption? Or is it about correcting the situations that we have today on this earth that we would label as badness? And there's several things that create this short-term view that is not productive. So one thing is we have to extend short-termism to the longer term. It's time to eliminate the buy now, pay later logic that's promoted by both politicians and corporations. So politicians are known for their ability to, what they say is, kick the can down the road, making near-term investments and paying them in future. So they say, we'll get this payback in 10 years. But in 10 years, they actually don't do that because they were wanting to buy other things, so the payback doesn't happen. Business leaders often do similar things in trading to create a better-looking profit and loss statement or balance sheet. So they're discount pricing at the end of the year to advance sales or bring them in from next year, so their e-book looks more attractive to investors. But they're actually buying that revenue for this year to the benefit of their bonuses, so they have a personal conflict of interest. And these behaviors are driven because performance is only judged over the short terms. The politicians want to be reelected at the next opportunity, and the boss needs to deliver those quarterly financial results. Neither of those behaviors generate benefits for society. The results are self-serving and not altruistic for the benefit of humanity. So constancy of purpose requires evaluation of business results from a long-term perspective, not from a short-term one. We also need to seek austerity and avoid consumerism. So conspicuous assumption, which Thorsten Veblen talked about in the 1890s. It's consumerism to demonstrate status or style. So consumerism is economic consumption that acquires goods or service in increasing amounts for the sake of demonstrating an increase in the status of a purchaser. So you take a look at a Hollywood star's collection of 30 or 40 luxury vehicles. They can only drive one at a time. But they do this to show, I have status. I'm cool. I have money. So this conduct drives businesses to overproduce to satisfy that growing demand. However, demand shifts with respect to style changes, and manufacturers revert into building in planned obsolescence, and they use advertising then to manipulate consumer spending and keep it high. So austerity reduces spending, and it does not invest in goods or services that are not necessary for their intended purposes. And austerity is practiced in two ways. One is strict control against overspending by not investing in frills or things that are not essential. Don't buy the gold-plated toilet seat, in other words. And the second is investing in efficiency producing by assuring that investments have a required process capability to perform the required actions. Many times I've seen in businesses where they make a procurement of a new product, a new production system, and they just buy the same old one that had maybe a CPK of around 50 or 60%. And they don't try to increase that CPK up to maybe 80 or 90%, but they just buy the old one. So they're basically buying 2/3 of a machine, not a full one. And so here we see that austerity only invests in necessities and makes sure that those investments actually deliver the essential benefits. We also have to develop a global Seisou mindset. So we have to ask difficult questions, seek equitable solutions, and then act to the benefit of humanity. Now, it's interesting. If we observe in times of war, nations operate much more productively. There's an interesting book by Stuart Chase called The Tyranny of Waste, in which he compared what happened before the First World War and after the Second World War. And then His book was written in the 1930s, and he's going backwards, and he's saying, you know, if I took a helicopter view or an airplane view of the world, I would see we were actually doing things quite well during the war. We only spent and did those things we needed to support the war effort. But after the war, we went back to our old ways and did all sorts of terrible things. And this resulted then in the decade of the 20s, what was at the beginning called the Roaring 20s, because it was taking off because of this drive consumerism. And then afterwards, it became the crash of the 20s. And so we start seeing nations are seeking their own benefit peacetime above that of their neighboring states. So a global Seisou mindset is concerned with distribution of global resources as required to make local needs, and it attempts to distribute in an equitable manner the resources necessary for the good of humanity so that health, peace, and prosperity can be enjoyed by all people on the earth. So resources like food, nutritious food, clean water, healthcare, education are essentials for all communities everywhere on earth. And hoarding of resources by nations or individuals is to be discouraged, as a new way of thinking embraces all nations under the common umbrella of humanity. And we need to work together to collaborate in redesigning a global system that distributes what is needed to those that need it the most. However, this mindset must be systemic. It must address all of the elements of needed of change to everyone who's involved in that system. So humanity's rule number one needs to be clean up your own mess. And so how to start this global quality transformation is we need to start local, and then we need to build global. So those who are responsible for the mess that we see in this world must be held accountable for cleaning up the mess. There should be no get out of jail card, if you will, so that we can dodge the bullet and say, not my responsibility. But we also have to design new ways of working that prohibit waste, loss, and inefficiency in the future. So we have to think forward and say, how will we create those states where we no longer have these conditions, in addition to cleaning up the situation we have? When I was in Rwanda 2 years ago, I saw that each local community, it's approximately 300 families in a local community, they take 1 weekend a month to fulfill a social obligation for community service, all of them working together. And they're doing a project that advances the quality of life within their village. They choose what that is. They make the choice, what does it take to improve our quality of life? And then they work together to do that, and they contribute to make that happen. So the question is it possible to extend that best practice everywhere? Another situation, in India, we see small businesses combine their resources to obtain global benefits that none of them could attain on their own. This is called cluster resources. And over 75% of the world is made up of small businesses. So how can we leverage their capabilities? My friend in Argentina, Marcos Bertin, is always talking about how in South America, it's the small businesses that really keep the communities going. In America, the Small Business Administration says that the innovation comes out of the small businesses, and then they get bought up or bought out by an acquisition or a merger into a larger corporation. So how can we leverage and create this engine for entrepreneurship in that small business? That's really at the core of the thinking processes of Silicon Valley. So in Finland, we see that it's natural for companies to share best practices and work with universities to develop competence in current and future generations. So is this a best practice? Can we take all of these best practices from the world and then say these are national best practices which we should consider applying in other parts of the world? So what can be done at a local level where you are today that will move politicians to find benefits that would be achievable at the national levels? And so we need to extend our reach to global Seisou. We need to develop a global culture that creates a mindset of ownership for the resources of Earth, that has responsibility for its frugal consumption, and a strong commitment to constancy of purpose in applying this quality attitude to everything, everywhere, for everybody. Seisou is not the first step in daily management. So macro quality will require the prerequisite sets of Siri Sitan to make Seisou operate in the right way. Now, Siri, it means, if we're talking about macro quality, it means to build environmental awareness by a deep study to make sense out of all dimensions that generate waste, loss, or create inefficiencies which impact on life on this planet. So serious about creating order in the workplace. CTON is about structuring things so they're immediately available for use when it's necessary. And if we talk about CTON for macro quality, we're saying order the chaos by removing historical barriers, correcting past errors to rectify environmental issues as soon as possible, and plan to rapidly and equitably stabilize consumption. So we have to develop a global culture, quality of life for the sake of humanities. So a system of changes will be required in order to reverse the effects humanity has inflicted upon this planet. So there are some takeaway lessons. George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Now, when I looked at extending this series of managing for quality, and I started thinking about this, I started thinking I've had on my feeling a burden for how do we extend quality to the United Nations? How do we extend quality into these other dimensions? And not just the ones where we have traditionally looked at. So the question we have to ask ourselves as a global quality community, and particularly as an American quality community, where many people look at us and saying, you know, ASQ is the voice of quality. What is our voice saying? How will we prepare ourselves and our organizations for these dimensions that are changing and that will confront all of humanity in the future? So as a summary statement, say in this Anthropocene age, where humanity is creating the change, only humanity can act positively to reverse the direction of the environmental changes and prohibit its continued degradation in the future. So in this webinar, we've addressed learning objectives to discover the challenges your career will face in the future, understanding the evolved concept of macro quality, discovering the current state of our environmental situation, learning how quality can influence the situation alternatively, and recognizing what it is that you can do to help. So I want to thank you, and we will continue in January, I believe it's the 21st, and we'll talk about quality as an economic imperative. Because one of the things we have to do is we have to change the way we think of global economics. It can no longer be based on macroeconomic theory of supply and demand where quality is absent. And we have to elevate quality to that level to make this whole system work. So each of the next 5 lessons that we're going to talk about will be concentrating on how do we advance quality in this system and what are the changes we need to make in our thinking and acting so that we can actually have quality for humanity. So Doug, I think now we have time for some questions, if there have been some coming in.
Yes, we do. We will got a couple questions coming in. I want to thank those of you who have provided them to us. The questions we've gotten are from several people. Let's see. So Carrie Bass asked first, how does these concepts of macro quality overcome political resistance? You know, aversion to socialism. And secondly, based on the definition of quality, should technology and automation that replaces labor or people be pursued or avoided? What do you think about that?
Well, are we calling for socialism? Well, it all depends on what you mean by socialism. I prefer not to use words that are politically charged. You know, do we have to care for one another? Do we care about other people's burdens? I think this is a basic precept in all moral codes of humanity. And so in that sense, yes, we do. Does that mean that people have to suffer? No, but it means that we have to take a look and care for those who are not given the same circumstances. And when people have a situation that they can't deal with. I've been here, I'm living in Finland, I've had cancer on multiple occasions, I've been hospitalized 4 or 5 times. If I was in America, I would have been bankrupted by that. And so the system I look at, I say, you know, it's treated me very fairly. Do I mind that I pay a lot of taxes? Not really. My children have gone to school for free education. We've had many of the benefits. My wife's mother, before she passed away, she couldn't leave the house. They brought food to her in her house. Now, so there are many situations in a social system where the caring for people, and this is this part of the situation that I think is most important, it's that they are genuinely caring to make sure that everybody has what they need to have. And even in this system, people don't like the fact that if you get some payments, that some people just want to use it for drinking. And that's not acceptable in our society either. So as you start thinking, is socialism, it's a politically charged word, but caring for others is, I think, the way I would look at it. And when we ask the question about technology, should we stop investing in technology? No, we can't. Technology is here, it's coming. But what we have to do is we have to be responsible about how we put technology in place. So if you take a look in systems in Japan, for instance, where they talk about giving workers a guaranteed safety net so they won't lose their job for technology change. Well, what that means is that it becomes incumbent on the organization to manage that control of change. And it's interesting, just I think it was 12 days ago, not even 12 days, 6 days ago, McKinsey Company came out with a study. And they said, yes, 78% of the executives in the world say it's important to develop our people for the coming age. But interestingly enough, 45% have no idea what that is or have done nothing. And so even though everybody's agreeing that we need to develop our people, nobody's knowing what to do about it. And only 12% of that group, and these are all executives, global executives, 12% has been doing something. And that means 88% have only really been either thinking about it or avoiding it. So the challenge when we come to developing people is we have to do more of it, not less. And we have to think further ahead. It's not just I need to have a Python programmer next week. It's I need to have people who can think in systems. I need to have some fundamentals in terms of how they're managing their lives. Another question.
Okay. So here's one from the chat recently. What are your thoughts on how to change the common misconception that stewardship is a cost? Well,
here's the question. Really, do we really understand what cost is? And I think that when I take a look at organizations and accounting systems, most costs are calculated wrongly. Okay, so for instance, if I take a look at a business, so I was at Hewlett-Packard, we had a production line. I was told by the general manager, this is the most productive product we have, and it was in the out of production class. So every time we would produce it, we would only make 50 units, but it was so profitable we had to do it. Except the system of accounting and the allocation process never actually fully burdened that product with all of its costs. So they came out of the overhead. And because they came out of the overhead, they were taxed essentially across the profitable products, which paid to make that one look like it was more profitable. And one of the things I did was we actually moved that product to a new building. Anything going in or out of there, we put actual cost tracing on as an activity-based costing system. And when we did it, we found out we were not even coming close to getting our sales price back. And so we then canceled it because all of the things were totally distorted. So when we talk about cost, most standard accounting systems actually are very distorted in the way they deal with cost. So is stewardship a cost that cannot be recovered? Or is it a part of how we actually have to manage life for the future? So it all depends on how we're acting as a steward. What are we doing? Are we keeping things neutral? Are we reversing effect? Or are we finding ways to do things in a way that's beneficial for the future? So stewardship has all three of those implications to it. So stewardship is not just a cost. It can also be a growth dimension, and it can also be a way of eliminating the waste and stuff in the system, which creates efficiency. And that sounds an awful lot like what we in the quality community and the manufacturing community have been trying to do with lean.
Okay. It's a hard thing to change these long-established guidelines. Here's a question. How do we stimulate top management at the level, top management of a firm, to move towards this vision within their strategic plans? Because you're really talking about a strategic shift here, aren't you?
Yes, it is a strategic shift. And the way to get them to think about it is we have to have a system of incentives. And so I'm not talking just about monetary incentives. I'm talking about that we guarantee certain types of work or we take care of things. And many people say, well, this is the intervention of government in if you will, the free market trade. And I said, well, actually, yes, it is. But we're already doing that. So we give subsidies in industries, we do other things. So we're already have no free markets basically in the world. And I think that's a myth when we take a look at this economically. So in this next year, I've got a project that I'm going to work on with a couple of financial guys talking about, how do we actually change the economic perception of the world? And quality is not the place to do it from. It's accounting and finance, because they're the people who are the keepers of the numbers. Quality has done a very horrible job by introducing cost of quality and cost of poor quality and so forth, because they're not accepted by the financial community. They're not the indicators they use for managing. And so we have to find some way to get them to question their measurement system itself, and then find a better way to drive that measurement that actually accounts for things in a better way. And then things will be taken care of in a more systematic approach. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about in our next go-round. How do we actually have to address those issues? Now, quality cannot actually be the be-all and end-all, the lever that moves the world, if you will. Like Archimedes said, give me a lever long enough and I'll move the world. Quality is that lever, but we're not the ones who are applying the pressure. It has to be picked up by those we have conversations with. We have to be the trusted advisors to that executive team. And that means we have to learn how do we get their trust. I work in this world of executive support and have for over 30 years. And I've supported many well-known executives. And what I find the very most important thing to them is, am I getting honest feedback? Am I really understanding what all the options are? Can I see it from all the different points of view? It's not about telling them what to do, but it's about giving a solid piece of analysis that shows them the options. What are the benefits and the things to be avoided, the unintended consequences, and then letting them make that decision. So when I interviewed Peter Drucker, and I talked about this once before in this lecture series, and I asked him, how does quality convince an executive what they need to do? And he says, that's not your job. Your job is to give them high quality information so they can decide what the best course is. And so those are choices that have to be made at the governance level of quality, what I call Gemba 3 decisions. And I think that this is where we have to elevate quality. We have not done a good job in it. When people who are trained in factory management systems try to get to the executive level, it's a stretch that's almost too far. So we have to figure out, how do we actually convince that executive team to do things in a different way? And the first thing I think we have to do is we have to teach them to think differently about what quality really is. Another question.
Okay, so we are kind of getting down to the end here. I think we just have one more. Are there programs that can offer help for entrepreneurs in developing places, such as, Zambia or other places in Africa? Those are good examples of places where development is undergoing right now. Financial resources are a challenge. Are there any programs, perhaps through the UN? What do you think?
Yes, I worked for 3 years with one of those. It's at the International Trade Center, and they called it basically a global quality program. And what we were doing was we did a pilot in 5 African nations. We had to stop it because of COVID, so we couldn't travel. But we trained a group of students to create continual improvement specialists. And when we went into those countries, they thought quality was ISO 9000, do what the document does and you got quality. So they saw nothing about improvement. The fact that Kaizen existed was like a miracle. That's cool. The fact that you could do things for your family, oh, wow, that's different. Never heard of that before. That what we're doing in the tribe, that tradition has something to do with quality and that culture means something. So all of those are foreign concepts in Gambia, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Kenya. Well, not so much in Kenya, but there were some traditions already there. But as you start taking a look at those countries, there's 55 nations in Africa. The sub-Saharan nations are some of the poor. They are the poorest in the world, and they need to have the help. So the United Nations and the World Bank got together. They created an organization called the International Trade Center located in Geneva. It's targeted at providing assistance to help the 77 least developed and developing nations in improving their capability to produce goods and services that they can bring into international markets through trade. And we have created this quality program that is documented at the International Trade Center. They call it the Global Quality Platform. It's got an IT platform, and then we have this Global Quality Training Program where we're training CI specialists in those countries. We got in the first year of active work in the 5 countries, we had about 150 people through that training program, and it's about 20 weeks of training. It's paid for by UN subsidies, so the people get paid for their families and food and so forth, so they can come to this, and then they get jobs coming out of this, doing the training and developing of the small and medium enterprises inside their own nations. And so I think this is a model that can be expanded upon. JUICY has a similar type of thing that's operating right now in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia was the next country we were planning on going into until the COVID came about. So, you know, I think that there are some movements afoot, and I just finished training 30 more people to go and get engaged in that process. And so that training process has been a year long to get the people trained so they can have that sort of expertise. So I think that there are things coming and programs that are in the developmental stages that make a lot of sense. What had happened before is the UN would do only one of 2 things. It'd either buy test equipment for a country or pay for your ISO 9000 certification. And after that, they washed their hands of it. And I went to Geneva and had talks with the directors at the International Trade Center. I said, you have to enable the people to do quality for themselves. It's not enough to give them a piece of equipment or say get a certification. They have to understand what it is and what does it mean to be quality and to act in the ways, and how do they use methods and tools to make those improvements happen. And I think that's the challenge that we in the quality community, we can actually rise to that occasion and deal with that. But you know, that challenge isn't just in Africa. It's also in South America. It's in Central America. It's also in many states in the United States where we have still pockets of poverty and places where they don't have those sorts of things. You know, ASQ used to have Quality Kid as a way of building quality into the grade school education, and it's gone away. And yet, all of those things are good initiatives, and we have to rethink strategically, what does it mean to be the voice of quality, to be the purveyors of quality, not just in America, but in the whole world. And that's the rethinking process that I would like to challenge us to go through.
Okay, well, thank you. We have some comments from people who feel that this talk had more questions than answers, and that I can kind of agree with that. There were more questions than answers. Will you be addressing some of these things in upcoming talks between now and May?
That's exactly what the intent is. So we're going to talk about economics in the next time, and if we take a look, I think the next slide has the list of the webinars on it. So you took control, so I don't have control.
Here we are.
So we'll talk about quality. We'll talk about this, what you were calling the social issues, but the social imperative. We'll talk about the human rights in this issue. We'll talk about the political effects, and then we'll sum it all up in the last lecture.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there's some who will feel that this is you're talking socialism. And unfortunately, as you mentioned earlier, there is a political air to that which causes people to kind of shut down when they hear that word. But you are talking a broader sense, not a narrow sense, and that makes it a different talk, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think that when you talk about socialism, it tends to be juxtaposition against something else. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the good of humanity. And in that sense, humanity has gone through 4 ages, if you will. You know, we had Homo erectus at the very beginning. Then we had Homo sapiens, and Adam Smith introduced us to Homo economicus and the economic man. And now we're moving into a world I call Homo socialis, the social man. the man where we actually think about how do we work together in this environment so that we can manage what this earth has to give.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Watson. Remember, you'll get an email in 24 hours. Want to thank all of you for attending and your good questions. We will see Dr. Watson as we move forward. Thank you all.